October 21st, 1805. On the blood-soaked deck of HMS Victory, Admiral Lord Nelson, the hero of the British Empire, lay dying. But as a French sniper's bullet ended his life, his final wishes weren't just of victory or glory. They were of a secret that could shatter his heroic legacy. A 4-year-old girl named Horatia. In a final addition to his will, he begged his nation to care for her, the daughter he adored. But in the wake of his heroic death, the nation he saved and the family who inherited his glory would cast her aside, leaving his abandoned daughter to fight for her very identity in a world that saw her as a disgrace. This is the story of Admiral Nelson's darkest secret. He was the savior of a nation, the admiral who shattered Napoleon's ambitions on the high seas. His name, Horatio Nelson, is a synonym for heroism, for courage, for a legacy of victory carved into the very soul of Britain. But beyond the thunder of cannons and the glory of battle, Nelson harbored a secret so profound it threatened to unravel everything he stood for. It wasn't a military strategy or a political alliance. It was a little girl, his daughter, a child he adored, yet left to the mercy of a world that would betray her, abandon her, and force her to fight for her own identity. This is not the story of the hero of Trafalgar. This is the story of his darkest secret and the daughter he left behind. Our story begins not on a battlefield, but in the hushed, gossiping drawing rooms of Georgian London. The affair between Vice Admiral Lord Nelson and Emma, Lady Hamilton, was the scandal of the age. He was Britain's most celebrated naval commander, married for over a decade. She was the beautiful, vivacious wife of his close friend, Sir William Hamilton, the British envoy to Naples. Their connection was electric, a passionate affair that defied convention and entranced a nation. But this was more than just a forbidden romance. It produced a secret that had to be hidden at all costs. On January 29th, 1801, in a rented house in Piccadilly, London, Emma Hamilton gave birth to a daughter. The child was the living embodiment of her and Nelson's love, but in the eyes of society, she was a symbol of shame, an illegitimate child who could ruin them both. And so began a grand and desperate deception. The baby was christened Horatia Nelson Thompson. An elaborate fiction was constructed. She was the child of a fictitious seaman named Thompson, whom Nelson and Emma, in their great benevolence, had decided to adopt as their godchild. To further the lie, the infant Horatia was sent to live with a wet nurse, Mrs. Gibson, only brought to her parents' home for special occasions, always under the guise of being their cherished godchild. For the first 4 years of her life, Horatia herself believed she was an orphan, unaware that the glamorous couple who doted on her were, in fact, her mother and father. The deception was all-encompassing. Nelson, a man not known for his subtlety, grew tired of the charade and longed to live openly with Emma and recognize Horatia as his daughter. He wrote to her with aching paternal love. Before leaving for his final voyage, he penned a letter to the little girl, signing off with the words, "Receive, my dearest Horatia, the affectionate parental blessing of your father, Nelson and Bronte." He instructed Emma to give it to her, a final, desperate attempt to claim her as his own. But it was a truth the world was not ready to hear. While Nelson was conquering the seas, a private battle was raging in his heart. His love for Horatia was absolute. He called her his dearest angel and spoke of her constantly in his letters. He dreamed of a day when the charade would end, when he could divorce his wife, marry Emma, and create a legitimate family. But that day would never come. In the autumn of 1805, Nelson boarded HMS Victory for the last time. Just before the fleet engaged the combined forces of France and Spain off Cape Trafalgar, he added a final, poignant codicil to his will. It was not about titles or estates. It was a father's plea. In it, he praised Emma for her service to the country and then wrote the fateful words, "I leave to the beneficence of my country my adopted daughter, Horatia Nelson Thompson, and I desire she will use in future the name of Nelson only." He was bequeathing his mistress and his secret child to the care of the nation he was about to defend with his life. It was his last will, his most sacred testament. On October 21st, as Victory was secured, Nelson was struck down. His final hours were filled with agony, but his thoughts remained fixed on his personal legacy. With his dying breaths, he pleaded with his comrades to take care of poor Lady Hamilton and trusted that the country he had saved would honor his final request. It was a trust that would be profoundly and cruelly betrayed. The news of his death and heroic victory reached England, and the nation plunged into mourning. But as they prepared to give their hero a lavish state funeral, the government and his family became aware of the codicil to his will. The secret was out in the circles that mattered. The gossip that had simmered for years now boiled over, and for Emma and 4-year-old Horatia, the world was about to collapse. Nelson's body was returned to England, and the country put on a spectacle of grief. The funeral cost the state a staggering sum. But Emma Hamilton, the woman he loved, was not invited. The government that owed its security to Nelson turned its back on his dying wish. His titles and estates passed to his brother William, who was made an earl. His official pension went to his estranged wife, Frances. Emma and Horatia, the two people he cherished most, were left with almost nothing. For Emma, it was the beginning of a catastrophic fall from grace. Once a celebrated beauty, she was now a social pariah, the scandalous mistress of a fallen hero. The small pension she had was not enough to maintain the lavish lifestyle she and Nelson had shared. Plagued by grief, she descended into heavy drinking and gambling. Creditors circled like vultures. The home she had shared with Nelson, Merton Place, had to be sold. Horatia was a silent witness to this collapse. Emma's debts grew so large that she was eventually imprisoned for them. Through it all, Emma maintained the fiction that had defined Horatia's life. Even in the face of ruin, she refused to admit she was Horatia's mother, insisting she was merely her guardian. This denial was a source of profound confusion and pain for the young girl. She was the daughter of a national hero, yet she was adrift. Her identity a question her own mother refused to answer. The story of Horatia Nelson is a powerful reminder that history is made not just by great battles, but by the private struggles of individuals caught in their wake. If you find these hidden stories as compelling as we do, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and hit the like button. It helps us continue to uncover the forgotten chapters of the past. Horatia's arrival back in England wasn't the triumphant return of a hero's daughter. It was the quiet, uncertain arrival of an inconvenient relation. She was met in Dover by one of Nelson's brothers-in-law and taken in by her father's family. While this ended the extreme poverty she had endured, it marked the beginning of a new kind of struggle. The Nelsons seemed to accept her as her father's child, but she was kept at a distance. Her role in their households was often more like a servant's than a beloved niece. She was tasked with caring for younger children and later acted as a housekeeper for one of her uncles. She was a living, breathing reminder of the family's great hero, but also of his great scandal. The illegitimacy of her birth was a stain they could not, or would not, fully wash away. Compounding her struggle was the internal conflict over her parentage. She proudly accepted Nelson as her father, but the years of denial from Emma had taken their toll. Horatia publicly and privately refused to acknowledge that Emma Hamilton was her mother. This denial became a cornerstone of her identity, a way to protect her father's reputation and to carve out a space for herself in a society that prized respectability. Thanks to Emma's early efforts, she was intelligent and well-read, fluent in several languages, but she lived under the constant shadow of her origins. She was a paradox, the daughter of a national icon, yet without inheritance or title. The nation that had celebrated her father's victories had no place for his child. Her life was a quest for the one thing her birth had denied her: legitimacy. She craved normalcy, a quiet life free from the drama and tragedy that had defined her childhood. In 1822, at the age of 21, Horatia finally found a measure of the stability she craved. She married Reverend Philip Ward, a kind clergyman from Norfolk, the very county where her father was born. Her biographer would later call the marriage the one certain good that befell her. With Philip, Horatia built the life she had been denied, a stable, respectable family. They went on to have 10 children. Though their life was simple, it was happy. She named her firstborn son Horatio, a clear tribute to the father she adored. Society began to accept her, not as an heir, but as a living link to the great Lord Nelson. Yet the question of her mother remained a silent, gnawing presence. For decades, she continued to deny Emma's maternity, even as evidence mounted. In 1845, the publication of Nelson's private letters finally offered conclusive public proof of her parentage, confirming that Emma was indeed her mother. The revelation sparked public sympathy, and a national appeal was launched that raised a modest sum. Even with the truth revealed, Horatia never wavered in her public stance. To accept Emma would be to accept the full, scandalous truth of her own origins, and the respectable life she had so carefully constructed was too precious to risk. It was a legacy of silence she carried to her grave. The story of Horatia Nelson raises a profound question. Did Britain betray its greatest hero by abandoning his daughter? What do you think the nation owed to the secret child of the man who saved them? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And for more stories from the hidden corners of history, don't forget to subscribe.